It's the year 1348. You're going about your day, maybe haggling at the market or tending your fields. But there's a whisper in the air, a chill that has nothing to do with the weather. A shadow is creeping across Europe, a silent, terrifying killer. It doesn't care if you're rich or poor, a knight or a peasant, young or old. They're calling it the Great Mortality, the Pestilence. We know it today as the Black Death. Hey everyone, and welcome. Today we're doing something a bit different. We're not just going to talk about history. We're going to try and step into it, into one of its darkest chapters. The Black Plague, as you probably know, was devastating. We're talking an estimated 30 to 60% of Europe's entire population wiped out in just a few short years. It's almost unimaginable. But here's the thing, some people did survive. So what if you found yourself transported back to that terrifying time? Armed with what we understand now about how diseases spread, and looking at historical accounts of what people actually did, could you have made it through? That's what we're going to explore. The plausible strategies, the bits of forgotten wisdom, and the sheer luck that might have given you a fighting chance. First off though, let's quickly set the scene. What exactly was this terror? The Black Plague was primarily caused by a nasty bacterium called Yersinia pestis. The main culprits spreading it? Fleas hitching a ride on black rats. Rattus, which were everywhere back then. It mostly showed up in three horrifying forms. Bubonic, with those infamous swollen lymph nodes called buboes. Pneumonic, attacking the lungs and terrifyingly contagious person to person. And septicemic, a blood infection that was almost always a swift death sentence. By 1347, it had hit ports like Kaffa and Messina, and from there, it just exploded across the continent. So, the enemy is invisible, deadly, and spreading fast. What's your first move? The plague is knocking on Europe's door, or maybe it's already creeping into your town. Your first challenge? Recognizing what you're up against. How would you even know this isn't just a bad fever or some other common ailment of the time? Well, the Black Death had some pretty distinctive and terrifying calling cards. Imagine waking up feeling off. Not just tired, but a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. Then comes a sudden, raging fever. Your teeth are chattering with chills, your head is pounding, and you're overcome with weakness. But the most infamous sign, for the bubonic form at least, was the bubo. These were excruciatingly painful swellings, usually in the groin, armpits, or neck. Wherever your lymph nodes were working overtime, fighting the infection. They could grow to the size of an apple, turn blackish purple, and were a pretty clear indicator that something truly awful was happening. And it happened fast. We're talking about feeling fine one day and being gravely ill, possibly even dead, within a week, sometimes just days. If it was the pneumonic form, you'd be looking at a violent cough, chest pain, and eventually coughing up blood. That version was even scarier because it spread directly through the air, from person to person. The septicemic form? You might not even see buboes. The bacteria would just overwhelm your bloodstream, leading to high fever, shock, and internal bleeding, turning your skin dark. Hence, one of the origins of the name, Black Death. Now, here's where your modern understanding, even if you're stuck in the 14th century, gives you a crucial edge. See, back then, nobody really knew what caused it. The leading theory was miasma, bad air, foul smells from swamps, decaying matter, or even unlucky planetary alignments. Others believed it was divine punishment, God's wrath unleashed upon a sinful world. This led to mass prayer gatherings, processions of flagellants whipping themselves to atone for sins. Tragically, all things that would have just helped the disease spread. And, as often happens in times of fear and confusion, minority groups, particularly Jewish communities, were horrifically scapegoated and blamed for poisoning wells. But you, armed with 21st century knowledge, even if you can't explain germ theory to a medieval peasant, know the real culprits. You know it's not about bad smells in the abstract, but about an invisible organism. You know that rats, those ubiquitous black rats skittering through every town and village, are carrying infected fleas, and those fleas are the tiny vampires delivering the deadly bite. For the pneumonic form, you know it's the breath of an infected person. This knowledge is your secret weapon. It means while everyone else is burning incense to purify the air or blaming their neighbors, you can focus on the actual transmission vectors. Understanding your true enemy is the first step to figuring out how to fight it, or better yet, avoid it altogether. So, you know the plague is out there, and you've got a better idea of what's really causing it than anyone else around you. Your best bet, by far, if the plague hasn't reached your doorstep yet, is one simple primal instinct: run. Or, more accurately, flee strategically. This is all about evasion and isolation. News traveled incredibly slowly back then. No internet. Number 24-hour news channels. It came via merchants, pilgrims, traveling troops, or simply word of mouth from one village to the next. You'd need to be an astute listener. Are there whispers from the nearest port city about a strange new sickness causing rapid deaths? Are travelers from a particular region suddenly scarce, or do they tell tales of towns decimated by an unknown malady? Are there an unusual number of funerals, or the chilling sound of death knells ringing more often than usual? These are your early warning signs. The moment you hear credible reports, not just vague rumors, but specific accounts of this kind of sudden, lethal illness with those telltale buboes or a devastating cough, that's your cue. Don't wait until it's in your street. Don't wait until your neighbors are falling ill. By then, it might already be too late for you or your family. The decision point is critical. When the threat seems real and is getting closer, it's time to seriously consider packing up and leaving. Now, how you flee depends heavily on your circumstances. If you were wealthy, like the characters in Boccaccio's Decameron, who famously retreated from plague-stricken Florence to countryside villas, your options were better. You'd gather your household, load up wagons with provisions, and head for an isolated rural estate, far from the crowded, unsanitary conditions of the city where rats and fleas thrived. The goal was self-sufficiency and minimal contact with the outside world. But what if you were a peasant, a craftsman, or a laborer? Much, much harder, but not impossible. You wouldn't have a country manor to escape to. Your aim would be to get to the most remote, sparsely populated area you could reach. Think small, isolated villages that weren't on major trade routes, places that might, with luck, be overlooked by the inexorable march of the plague. Even better, if you knew of truly self-sufficient hamlets, isolated farmsteads, or even monasteries in remote locations that practiced a degree of separation from the world, those would be your targets. What do you take? This isn't a holiday. You'd need non-perishable food, dried grains, salted meat if you could get it, dried fruit, tools for basic survival, an axe, a knife, warm clothing, because you don't know where you'll end up, and any small valuables you could carry to perhaps trade for essentials later. It's about survival, not comfort. But fleeing wasn't without its own perils. Firstly, you could already be incubating the plague without knowing it, and inadvertently carry it to a new, untouched area. A terrible thought. Roads would be dangerous, with societal order breaking down in some places, leading to banditry. And many towns and villages, terrified of outsiders bringing the sickness, would simply refuse entry, sometimes violently. You could find yourself a refugee with nowhere to go. So choosing your destination wisely is paramount. Avoid those busy trade arteries. The plague often traveled along these routes like wildfire. Look for natural barriers, mountains, dense forests that might offer some protection or isolation. And here's a piece of wisdom that was actually starting to emerge during the plague years, something we now call quarantine, from the Italian quarta giorni, meaning 40 days. If you did manage to reach a new, seemingly safe place, the smartest thing you could do, for your own protection and for the protection of any existing community, would be to isolate yourself and your family for a period, say 30 to 40 days. Find a secluded spot, an abandoned hut, or camp out at a distance. This would give time for any incubating illness to manifest before you tried to integrate. It's a hard discipline, but it could be a lifesaver for everyone. Let's say fleeing isn't an option. Maybe the plague arrived too quickly, you have elderly or sick family members you can't move, or you're already in a relatively isolated spot but want to make it even safer. In this scenario, your home becomes your fortress, your sanctuary, against the invisible enemy lurking outside. The strategy shifts from flight to lockdown and meticulous defense. Your absolute priority is to minimize, or ideally eliminate, all contact with the outside world. Think of it as creating a bubble around your household. No visitors. None. Not friends. Not distant relatives, not even the local priest if you can help it, unless they've also been in strict isolation. Every person who crosses your threshold is a potential carrier of fleas, or in the case of pneumonic plague, the disease itself. This sounds harsh, and it would have been incredibly difficult socially, but it's about survival. If supplies run critically low, and someone must venture out, a hugely risky endeavor, designate one person. This person should be healthy, ideally someone with a strong constitution, and they need to understand the risks and take precautions we'll discuss shortly. When they return, they should, if possible, remove outer clothing outside the home and wash thoroughly before interacting with anyone else. Many towns during the plague would literally shut up houses where infection was found, nailing doors and windows shut, sometimes with the healthy still inside with the sick. You're essentially doing a voluntary, more controlled version of this. Now, this is where your secret modern knowledge truly becomes a superpower, even with 14th century limitations. Hygiene. It sounds so basic to us, but in an era where germ theory was non-existent and sanitation was often questionable, a rigorous approach to cleanliness could have made a significant difference. Let's start with personal hygiene. Hand washing. Soap, often made from animal fat and lye or ash, did exist. Use it vigorously, frequently, especially after any contact with anything from outside your bubble, before eating, and after using the latrine. If soap wasn't available, even just energetic scrubbing with the cleanest water you could find would be better than nothing. Remember, you're trying to get rid of invisible fleas or contaminants. Bathing was less common, and public bathhouses, once plague hit, would have been hotbeds of infection. Avoid them like, well, the plague. But keeping your body as clean as possible within your home is still a good idea. Clean clothes are also important. Fleas can live in soiled clothing. If you have the means to boil laundry, do it. At the very least, air clothes thoroughly in direct sunlight if possible. UV light has some disinfectant properties, and it might help desiccate any lurking fleas. Next, environmental hygiene. This is where you declare war on your home's biggest unseen enemies, rats and their fleas. Your primary goal here is to make your home as inhospitable to these pests as possible. Waste disposal. Get all garbage, especially food scraps, far, far away from your dwelling. Don't let it pile up near the house where it becomes a 5-star buffet for rats. Bury it, or create a designated waste pit at a considerable distance. The fewer rats attracted to your vicinity, the fewer fleas. Cleanliness. Sweep your floors daily. Dirt and debris provide hiding places for fleas and food for rats. Reduce clutter. The more open and clean your living space, the fewer nooks and crannies for pests to nest. Medieval homes often had rush-strewn earthen floors. These would need to be changed regularly, and the old rushes burned or disposed of far away. Rat-proofing. This is a tough one with medieval building materials, but do your best. Inspect your walls, floors, and roof for any holes or gaps where rats could enter. Stuff them with whatever you can. Tightly packed rags, clay, wood, stones. Pay special attention to areas around doors and windows. Store food meticulously. Grains, flour, and other dry goods should be kept in sealed containers, pottery jars with tight lids, wooden chests, or metal containers if you were fortunate enough to have them. Don't leave food out. Now for direct vector control, battling the rats and fleas themselves, without the benefit of modern insecticides or rodenticides. This requires ingenuity. Cats, and sometimes dogs. A well-fed cat is a natural rat deterrent and hunter. If you had a cat, it could be an ally. However, there's a catch. Cats and dogs can also carry fleas. So if you have pets, try to keep them clean, a big ask, I know. And crucially, don't let them roam freely outside your sealed environment and then come back in, potentially bringing infected fleas with them. Herbal repellents. People at the time certainly believed in the power of strong-smelling herbs to ward off the plague, mostly tied to the miasma theory. They'd burn incense, carry posies of herbs like rosemary, rue, mint, wormwood, or lavender. While the scientific basis for these repelling Yersinia pestis itself is nil, some strong scents might have had a minor repellent effect on fleas, or at least made your living space less appealing to them. It probably wouldn't hurt, and it might have offered some psychological comfort by making the air smell cleaner. Flea traps, primitive. This is speculative, but people were desperate. A very simple trap might involve a shallow dish of water, perhaps with a little animal fat or oil on the surface to break the surface tension, placed on the floor overnight. Sometimes a light source like a candle, used with extreme caution due to fire risk, was placed nearby, as fleas are attracted to warmth and light. Some fleas might jump in and get trapped. It's a numbers game, unlikely to solve a major infestation, but every little bit of active effort counts. Finally, within your fortified sanctuary, you need food and water security. If you're locking down, you need enough supplies to last. Before the plague hits your area, or during a lull, you'd want to stockpile non-perishables, grains like wheat or barley, oats, salted or smoked meats and fish, dried beans and peas, hard cheeses, honey, a great natural preservative, and of course, ale or wine, which were often safer to drink than water. Water itself is critical. If you have your own well, protect it from contamination. Keep it covered. If your water source is a stream or river, collect it from upstream of any potential contamination, and if there's any doubt about its purity, boil it before drinking. This simple act, common for us, was not universally practiced for water safety then, but it could prevent other diseases that would weaken you and make you more susceptible to the plague. Even with the best laid plans for isolation, there might be moments when interaction with the plague-stricken world outside your sanctuary becomes unavoidable. Perhaps a desperate need for a specific medicine, a critical piece of news, or, tragically, the illness breaching your own defenses. In these moments, your modern knowledge again becomes vital, primarily in knowing what not to do. Desperate times breed desperate measures, and the 14th century was rife with cures and preventative practices that were at best useless and at worst actively harmful. You'd hear about bloodletting to balance the humors, strong laxatives and emetics to purge the body of toxins, or consuming bizarre and expensive concoctions involving crushed emeralds, pearls, or even arsenic. Avoid all of these. They would weaken you, make you more susceptible, or poison you outright. You'd also see extreme religious responses. Processions of flagellants, whipping themselves in public displays of penance, were a common sight. While born from genuine fear and faith, these large gatherings of people, often in close contact and emotionally overwrought, were perfect breeding grounds for the pneumonic plague to spread like wildfire. Your strategy, if you valued your life, would be to observe from a very, very safe distance, or better yet, not at all. Stick to your sensible principles of isolation and hygiene. Don't get swept up in mass hysteria, or fall for the promises of quack doctors or radical penitents. Now, for the hardest part, what if the plague does enter your household? This is where your resolve and precautions are tested to their absolute limit. If someone in your family falls ill, the immediate priority is to isolate them as much as humanly possible, even within your home. A separate room if you have one. If not, a corner, perhaps with a sheet hung as a makeshift barrier. This is heartbreaking, but it's about trying to save the rest of the household. If you are the one who must provide care, you need to take every precaution imaginable with 14th century means. This is where the idea behind the later plague doctor's mask might offer a clue, even if the full getup wasn't common in the first wave. Cover your nose and mouth with a thick cloth. Some people at the time stuffed these masks with herbs, lavender, mint, camphor, based on miasma theory. While the herbs wouldn't stop Yersinia pestis, a well-fitted cloth mask might offer a small degree of protection against airborne droplets if it's the pneumonic form. Crucially, avoid direct contact with the sick person's bodily fluids as much as possible. Wash your hands, arms, and face obsessively after any contact. And then there's the grim reality of death. With mortality rates so high, this was an almost inevitable outcome for many. Disposing of the deceased became a massive societal problem. If you face this tragedy, avoid touching the body directly if you can. Use cloths or gloves if you have them. Encourage or participate in swift and deep burial. In some overwhelmed communities, cremation became more accepted as a desperate measure to deal with the sheer number of bodies. The key is to minimize your exposure to the deceased, as fleas could still be present on the body or in their clothing for a short time. Surviving the Black Plague wasn't just a physical battle, it was an immense psychological one. Imagine the constant gnawing fear, the air thick with the smell of death and burning herbs, the endless tolling of funeral bells, if anyone was even left to ring them, the profound grief of losing loved ones, neighbors, and seeing your entire world turned upside down. It's a level of stress and despair that's hard for us to truly comprehend. So if you were locked down, trying to ride out the storm, maintaining morale and mental fortitude would have been just as critical as barring your door or washing your hands. How do you do that in the face of such horror? Routine would be essential. Sticking to daily tasks, however small. Preparing food, cleaning, mending clothes, tending a small garden if you had one, could provide a sense of normalcy and purpose in a world gone mad. Within your isolated family unit, maintaining social bonds would be crucial. Telling stories, singing songs, quietly perhaps, playing simple games if you had children, anything to foster connection and take your minds off the grim reality, even for a little while. For those with strong religious faith, prayer and a belief in a higher power could offer immense comfort and hope. The key, though, was not to let that faith lead you into risky behaviors like attending mass gatherings. Hope, however small, finding something to cling to, would have been a lifeline. How would you know if your efforts were paying off, if the tide was finally turning in your area? The plague didn't just vanish overnight. It often came in waves, hitting a community hard for several months, then receding, sometimes only to return later. You'd be looking for subtle signs. Fewer new cases being reported, or, more likely, fewer sounds of wailing and hurried burials. The death knells becoming less frequent. Perhaps you'd hear that certain, particularly notorious streets or districts were no longer seeing new deaths. More people might tentatively start to emerge from their homes, a little more life returning to the desolate streets. But even as things seemed to improve, caution would be your watchword. The plague was notorious for its recurrence. So you wouldn't throw open your doors and declare victory at the first sign of relief. You'd remain vigilant, maintaining many of your precautions, at least until it was very clear that the immediate wave had truly passed your specific area. It was a slow, fearful reemergence into a scarred world. If you made it through, if your strategies, your caution, and a healthy dose of luck saw you and your loved ones emerge from the shadow of the Black Death, you would step into a world irrevocably altered. Imagine. So many people gone. This massive depopulation, as tragic as it was, had profound and often unexpected consequences. Suddenly, there was a severe labor shortage. For the surviving peasants and laborers, this meant their work was more valuable. Wages actually rose in many places, and the rigid bonds of serfdom began to loosen as lords desperately needed workers for their lands. Social structures were shaken to their core. Art, literature, and religious views also underwent significant shifts, often reflecting a more somber, introspective, or even macabre outlook on life and death. If you survived, you'd inherit a world filled with fresh grief and trauma, but also, for some, new and unforeseen opportunities. Could you really have survived the Black Plague? By understanding the true enemy, the bacteria, the rats, the fleas, and by employing strategies like strict isolation, rigorous hygiene, especially hand-washing and waste management, and a cautious awareness of how the disease spread, you certainly would have increased your chances. But let's be honest, surviving the Black Death involved a monumental amount of luck and circumstance. Many who did everything right still succumbed, and some who did little still, by chance, made it through. While these strategies might have tipped the odds in your favor, for so many, it was simply about being in the right, or more often, the wrong place at the right or wrong time. The Black Plague remains one of the most terrifying chapters in human history, a stark reminder of our vulnerability, but it also forged resilience and, over centuries, pushed humanity towards a better understanding of disease and public health. What do you think? What other strategies, or even just sheer strokes of luck, might have helped someone survive? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this fascinating, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe for more deep dives into history, and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next adventure.